if you've got access to the internet, why not have a look at our Facebook page, all the details there, and we'll also tweet them out for you as well. It's at BBC Northampton. We'll keep you posted, and if you can tell us of what's going on where you are, just like Lionel did, our number 01604 234455. Now, if I use the word landlord, what image jumps into your mind? I have to say that the BBC doesn't own this building from which we're broadcasting right now. We've got landlords. Well, I've got a landlord in front of me. The thing is, the landlord who's just joined me and has sat down is about, perhaps, to win a national award. Kelly Lemon is a landlord. She's based in Corby. She's got rental properties in Corby and Kettering, and she's one of 3 finalists in the Houses of Multiple Occupancy Landlord of the Year Awards. That is a fantastic title. It sounds like something from Hogwarts. Houses of Multiple Occupancy. The awards take place in the very near future. In fact, in just a week's time. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
You wear more than one hat because, as well as being a landlord, you have a career in the broadcast industry, in the written world, in media. What was your image of what landlords were before you became one?
Well, unfortunately, I had the same image as many have, which is they're awful. They're sort of very tight and they can be very nasty, and they don't really care about their properties. And unfortunately, quite often that is the image surrounding landlords, which is why these awards are so fantastic when they recognise people that actually don't conform to that image whatsoever. And they actually do a really good job. So before I became a landlord myself, I didn't really know much about the arena. I became a landlord, and then I learned an awful lot about it. It was a very steep learning curve, and there's an awful lot involved. But actually, there's a lot of good work done by many of us, and that's what the awards are all about.
Why did you become a landlord in that case? Was it to have another string to your bow if the media side of things dried up?
Absolutely, that was one of the reasons. But very early on in my career, I started at Bloomberg Television, and after 2 years, I was made redundant, and I learned a very valuable lesson, which is a job's not for life anymore, and there's not much security. So I'm passionate about media. I love journalism. I love doing what you're doing. I love that sort of stuff. But I wanted a pension pot. I wanted financial security that gave me choices, and I was fortunate that I've managed to buy enough properties, and I've rent them room by room to make them profitable, that actually now working is a choice rather than something I have to do.
Does that mean that to be a landlord, and as I said in the introduction, and as you've just said, to have multiple properties, do you have to have the wealth of the Borgias to do it?
Absolutely not. For me, when I started out in property, I looked at what I wanted to achieve, and for me, I wanted to buy a property. I had a bit of savings myself. I moved to an area where I knew I could afford it, and then I learned and I built a track record. With that track record, then I went to other people and said, if I can borrow some funds, I can then do this the same, and I'll pay you a monthly return. So actually, you talk about the image of landlords, people think landlords are completely rolling in it, and that's not always the case. I wanted to build a portfolio, and I managed to build a portfolio of about 10 properties in a very short period of time, and I did that by leveraging other people's funds and borrowing funds, and I also used government schemes to use grants, etc., to take on empty properties that had been empty for a long time and actually convert them.
So what are the skills for being a successful landlord? Because it's not just about having the money to go and buy somewhere with a door key. You've got to have a lot more about you than that.
For me, I think the key skill is communication. I think it's vital in everything you do. And I think a bit like being a journalist, really your job as a journalist is to kind of ask questions and get to the crux of the issue. And it's the same with the landlord. Don't be afraid to speak to your tenants. And one of the things, especially when you manage a property, if you manage taking a property and renting 6 separate rooms to 6 different people, a lot of people will look at that and go, oh my goodness, that's just going to be a nightmare. But it's all about talking to people. Find out what those issues are. Before I moved to Corby 3 years ago, I actually lived in a HMO. So I know exactly what it's like when somebody doesn't put the toilet lid down or the litter's not taken out, etc., etc. And some of the issues like not putting away the dishes, they may seem really minor to you and I, but actually they create real tension in the house. So if I said one of the skills is communicating, it's asking the questions and seeing what you can do to resolve them. As soon as you know what the matter is, get cracking, nip in the bud.
How much of it is a mindset of being a service provider? Because I think a lot of people who rent property just think, right, well, you're the landlord, you're the one who owns the asset, I'm paying you to live in it, I don't need to take an awful lot of care of your property because I'm paying you the going rate and that's all I have to do. You as the landlord, yes, you've got the costs of running the place, but you're also offering a service too.
Absolutely, and it amazes me how many of my colleagues and how many other landlords see their tenants just as potential problems, but they're actually clients. They're paying you every month, and it's your duty to deliver that service. And in terms of dealing with tenants that maybe don't appreciate where you're coming from, the best thing you can do is get in front of them, explain your situation, communicate with them, and as they start to get to know you as a landlord, they'll realise that actually you are human, you're not sort of the image and the stereotype that they may think you are, and you'll tend to find that they interact with you a lot better and they tend to respect the property much more.
Which means there's got to be trust on both sides.
Absolutely.
Okay, now, the properties that you have got, you said you wanted a nest egg, you wanted a pension fund, you've got the capital asset, if you like. How much of your time actively is taken in being a landlord, given that there are only 24 hours in the day, and if you have a working career, however active it might be, you've still got to apportion some time to running those properties, to running those spaces, and not everybody is going to be a good tenant. You're going to have to allow time for that too.
Absolutely. I actually now developed a business working with people who want to buy property, and I actually do that for them. And we got so many properties and we got larger. And obviously, if you've got X amount of properties, but then you have multiple tenants in them, you've got an awful lot of tenants, and you're absolutely right, you need time to dedicate to that. So I actually opened a lettings agency that does exactly that, because I couldn't find a letting agent that did that job well. So in terms of how much time does it take up for me personally, this is now what I do full time, and I still keep a hand in the media industry. But I actually have people now running my lettings department. But if there's an issue, if there's a bad egg, if there's a problem, I'll personally get involved to deal with that, because ultimately they're my assets, they're my properties. But if you haven't got a lot of time, then hire a good lettings agency, because they can do that job for you. Where you're going to come in as a landlord is when the letting agency comes to you and says the boiler's broken or this repair needs to be done, and that's when you have to make a decision about what kind of accommodation you want to deliver.
There are horror stories. People who become private landlords perhaps have one property or two. You've gone down a very corporate route. It's got you into a national award scheme which you may well go on to win. But for those people who perhaps do have a bad experience, how can they mitigate against it happening again in the future? What are the pitfalls? What are the top tips of being a landlord and getting it right?
When I started off, the first property I bought had 4 students in, and I didn't know that was a HMO, and I had a very steep learning curve. And I was that person that had one property, I had a full-time job, and I had to learn on the go. And that's the best advice I can give. This, in essence, is almost another career. If you go to a job, you make money from it. If you have an asset, you make money from it. So there does need to be a bit of dedication if you want to do it well and you want to maximise your profits. So I learnt more and more about houses. I learnt more and more about investments, and I really enjoyed it. And obviously, as a financial journalist, I find the topic of money quite interesting anyway. But if you've got one property and you're finding you're having a really bad experience, there's a whole community out there of other landlords that can pull that information, that can share those horror stories. And more importantly, the more you learn about how you can put those things right, then you can actually do something to fix them. And it brings me back to communication and understanding what you're into and how you can progress, really.
Economically, at the moment, interest rates are on the floor. That makes it a very good time for people to get into property-related borrowings. It's not so good for people with deposits, for instance. Is now a good time to get into the lettings industry?
Absolutely. And for me, interest rates are, and I find the subject quite interesting, but I'll never buy a property that doesn't make money. And what I mean by that is I don't look at necessarily just market trends. So for me, when I take a property, the reason I rent it room by room is because it's more profitable. So if hypothetically interest rates went to 15%, for example, I know that they're still going to be profitable. But with that comes hard work. It's much easier to let one property to one person. If you want to have that margin, you do need to put the extra work and management in.
Question for your journalistic head. Ed Miliband got beaten up by Marlene Klaas just about 48 hours ago over the mansion tax. How does the mansion tax have implications for you as a landlord? For people who are perhaps getting taxed on bedrooms that they don't use, are there implications where people might perhaps be divesting themselves of properties which might come on the market, which a landlord could snap up?
Absolutely. There's always buying opportunities. And what you're finding now in the society that we live in is more and more people, there's been a change in the benefit system, but more and more people actually are only eligible or able to afford to rent a room. And that market really isn't being serviced. There's not many letting agents that deal with it. There's an awful lot of legislation around it that can be simplified, and that's really where there's an opportunity.
And final question, you're in for a national award. If you win it, what does that mean for you as a landlord? Do you just carry on doing what you're doing? Do you say, look, I'm one of the best in the country, therefore we're going to have a rent review? What is it that you will get out of being the nation's top landlord, or landlady if the term is correct?
For me, it will be a great recognition that actually we're doing a good job. And for me, that's what I want to achieve with it. The most important people in this process are the tenants. We get tenant testimonials, we ask them questions, we get feedback. So really, it's getting the information from them. And if I'm lucky enough to win this award, it's actually the industry saying, you know what, that's absolutely right, you're doing a good job, carry on.
And Northamptonshire tenants are good tenants?
Overall, you very rarely find people that are deliberately bad tenants. What you do sometimes find, they've got other issues going on in their life, and that's when I come back to communication. So many of the problems are caused by miscommunication. And when you talk to me about the award, I suppose it's great. Zest Property Group is the company that I formed to do this, so it's going to be a great recognition for us as a company.
I would never have thought that a journalist would be talking about communication as a means to getting business done. Of course she's going to say that, and absolutely right too. Kelly, all the very best. Thanks for coming in. Good luck with the awards.
Thank you.
You'll get about half a minute's worth of this, with time being as it is as we get towards the news at 3 o'clock. It is, however, a bit of Huey Lewis.
We've had some